Welcome to Shameless. Here we explore the transformative power of courage and action.
Thank you for joining us today. If you've enjoyed our conversations and you want to have more insightful discussions and hear from other incredible guests, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us to grow and continue bringing this amazing content. Thanks for joining in and enjoy today's episode of Shameless Podcast.
In your experience, can you tell when someone has low self-esteem?
So I think that any signs that of somebody having low self-esteem for me is when an individual does not back themselves, when they do not have the confidence in or conviction in something either that they know or they're trying to sort of explain. Even further than that is that when people react very strongly to any criticism, so they're hypersensitive to criticism, you start to wonder, where does this originate from? How is this this aspect that is not so great being blown into a situation like this? Somebody who withdraws socially in a space, and you find yourself trying to constantly bring them into a conversation, and they might not necessarily feel like they see themselves with the value that I might see them.
Question around that social withdrawal then. How do we know it's the difference between someone who's introverted and doesn't necessarily gain energy for spending time with many people versus it being an indicator or a marker or precursor to low self-esteem?
So I think that is a very interesting one. I believe that somebody who has ideas, who have thoughts, and might actually even want to be in the conversation, they can withdraw or exclude themselves as a function of actually not feeling that their contribution is worth it. And so I think there's a very thin line between those two. But if you believe that your comments are not worthy to actually be within the conversation, then my thought is, what are you feeding yourself? Are you feeding yourself with negativity, or are you actually driving yourself in the right direction to actually be able to contribute in a meaningful way? And I think somebody who's more introverted might not want to talk, but they're not necessarily feeding themselves negative stuff. But somebody who has low self-esteem will not talk because they actually don't feel like they're worthy.
So that probably then reinforces any negative perceptions that they have from themselves. Likely leads to things like depression, probably enhances your anxiety that you may or may not already have.
Yes, however, I would like to take the spin to make it a bit more positive. Because I actually think that though an individual might be in moments or even in prolonged spaces suffer from low self-esteem, the first step is actually realizing that they are feeding themselves this fuel and this cycle. And at the end of the day, this cycle of anxiety that they might feel is actually originating from something a bit deep-seated that they could actually work on, reinforce the more positive mindset to actually get them to a space where they can actually overcome that heavy feeling.
Definitely being able to understand that you may be in that rut of low self-esteem, you're saying, is like step one in that process. But what other indicators of someone having low self-esteem? Because I have been in situations where someone just lashes out in a way that I think is socially too wide, if that makes sense. And I think it was last month we spoke about social intelligence.
Yeah.
And the aspects of, understanding how that culture goes there. So in the cultural context of what we define in our cultural norms, the lash out just seems a little bit too crazy, especially if you were to give them constructive criticism. And I've also noticed that certain cultures do not do well with feedback. So is that low self-esteem? Was that just cultural
context?
Yeah.
And the thing is, I think we can talk about all of these things in in a lot of detail and the nuances across culture versus self-esteem versus introversion. And in the end of the day, the whole motion, at least for me, is we all need to be striving to see the better in others, and then being able to support others through a different space that they might be in. And that means, how do we fuel somebody else's light, and how do we fuel our own light? And I do believe that the cultural aspect does play a large role. As you mentioned earlier, your upbringing plays a large role in the way in which you view life. That doesn't mean that that's the only way to view life. And so at the end of the day, if we're able to build that resilience of mind, that presence of mind, that understanding, and also be able to accept criticism, accept comments or any inputs, then one of the main aspects of being able to accept actually is to have and to build that resilience and self-esteem. So if you find yourself being offended by somebody lashing out or criticizing you, then start to ask yourself the question, why am I actually feeling this way?
Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share as we embark on our mission to impact 1 million African lives by 2026.
This podcast is brought to you by Transformation Leader. You can follow us at www.t4leader.com.